The lights inside the theater felt brighter than usual, as if the room itself was holding its breath. The audience buzzed with restless excitement, conversations blending into a low hum that echoed off the walls. Simon Cowell sat at the judge's table with his usual composed posture, arms crossed, eyes scanning the stage with a look that suggested he had already seen everything there was to see. After decades in the entertainment industry, very little surprised him anymore. Magic tricks, emotional singers, dramatic backstories, elaborate illusions, he had witnessed them all, and most of them blended together in his memory. Tonight, he expected more of the same. The announcer's voice rang out, introducing the next act. There was nothing particularly dramatic in the introduction, nothing to hint that history was about to unfold. A single performer walked onto the stage, moving with calm confidence but without flashy gestures. The contestant smiled politely at the judges and gave a small wave to the audience. The crowd responded with light applause, curious but not yet invested. From Simon's perspective, this already felt familiar. He leaned back slightly, his expression skeptical, prepared to analyze every detail. When Simon asked the standard question about the act, the contestant answered simply. The explanation was brief, almost understated. There was no dramatic build-up, no attempt to oversell what was about to happen. That alone made Simon raise an eyebrow. Usually, performers tried too hard to convince the judges of their uniqueness before even beginning. This one did not. Still, simplicity did not mean authenticity. Simon had seen countless acts claim something extraordinary only to deliver carefully rehearsed illusions or digital trickery. As the performance began, the stage lighting softened. The atmosphere shifted subtly, like the calm before a storm. The contestant asked for something seemingly ordinary, an everyday object, something that could not possibly be prearranged. A member of the audience was invited to participate. Simon watched closely, his eyes narrowing. Audience participation was a classic technique, often used to create the illusion of randomness while secretly controlling the outcome. He had exposed many acts that relied on such tactics. The object was handed over. The contestant did not rush. Every movement was deliberate, slow enough that nothing seemed hidden. Simon leaned forward slightly now, curiosity starting to push against his skepticism. The performer spoke calmly, explaining what would happen next, making no grand promises, no exaggerated claims. It was almost too casual, which in itself felt suspicious. The first moment that drew a reaction came quietly. The object appeared to change in a way that was subtle but unmistakable. A murmur rippled through the audience. Simon's face remained controlled, but his eyes flickered. He told himself there had to be a trick, a clever sleight of hand. He had seen masters of deception do far more convincing things. Still, something about this felt different. The pacing was wrong for a trick. It was too slow, too exposed. The contestant continued, each step built on the last, not with flashy moves but with clarity. The audience member confirmed what they were seeing. The cameras zoomed in, projecting the details onto massive screens. Simon hated camera tricks. He had criticized acts before for relying on angles and editing. This time, however, the cameras seemed to work against the performer, showing everything clearly. That only deepened the mystery. Simon shifted in his seat. His lips pressed together, his expression tightening. He glanced briefly at the other judges. One of them leaned forward, eyes wide. Another shook their head in disbelief, whispering something under their breath. The audience grew louder, reactions building as the performance continued to defy simple explanation. Then came the moment Simon would later replay in his mind over and over again. The contestant made a request that seemed impossible. It was not dramatic, not loud, just calmly stated. What followed happened in plain sight. No smoke, no mirrors, no sudden blackout. The object responded exactly as described. Gasps erupted across the theater. People stood from their seats without realizing it, hands covering mouths, voices overlapping in shock. Simon felt a familiar irritation rise within him. Not anger, but something close to it, the discomfort of being challenged. He searched for the flaw, the hidden mechanism, the planted audience member, the delayed reaction. His brain ran through possibilities at lightning speed. Nothing fit. The act continued, pushing further into territory that made no sense within the rules Simon understood. He shook his head slightly, almost unconsciously. His microphone picked up a faint mutter of disbelief. For the first time in a long while, he felt genuinely unsettled. Not because he was scared, but because his authority as an expert felt threatened. If this was real, Then it broke every assumption he held about what should be possible on that stage. The contestant turned toward Simon, not confrontational, just respectful, as if inviting him to pay closer attention. Simon met the performer's gaze. There was no arrogance there, no smugness. Just calm assurance. That calmness bothered Simon more than any flashy confidence ever could. It suggested certainty, not performance. The final phase of the act approached. The contestant asked Simon himself to participate. The audience erupted in cheers. Simon hesitated for a fraction of a second. He knew agreeing would put him directly in the spotlight, exposing him to potential embarrassment if he missed something obvious. But refusing would look like fear. He nodded slowly and stood up. As Simon walked onto the stage, the crowd grew louder. He felt every eye on him, every camera tracking his movement. He reminded himself to stay analytical, detached. This was his territory. He had dismantled illusions far more complex than this. Yet as he stood beside the contestant, close enough to see every detail, the sense of unease intensified. The contestant explained what Simon would do. The instructions were simple. Simon followed them carefully, deliberately, making sure not to give anything away. He watched the performer's hands, posture, breathing. Nothing seemed hidden. When the moment came, Simon did exactly as instructed. What happened next was undeniable. It occurred in Simon's own hands. There was no distance, no camera trick, no audience manipulation. Simon froze. For a split second, the theater seemed to disappear. All he could focus on was what he was holding, what he was feeling, what he knew should not be possible. The audience exploded. Screams, applause, laughter, disbelief. Simon remained silent, staring down at the object as if it might suddenly reveal its secret. His face, usually so controlled, betrayed genuine shock. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again. He looked up at the contestant, searching for answers. Simon walked back to the judge's table slowly, his movements stiff. He sat down and ran a hand through his hair, something he rarely did on camera. The other judges bombarded him with questions, laughter mixing with disbelief. Simon shook his head again, this time more emphatically. When it was time to give feedback, Simon leaned into his microphone. The theater fell silent. Everyone waited, knowing this was one of those moments that would be remembered. Simon exhaled slowly, choosing his words with care. He admitted it openly. He said he thought the act was fake. He said he had been certain there was a trick, a setup, something he would catch. But then he paused, looking back at the contestant. His voice softened slightly as he acknowledged the truth. Whatever had just happened was real, at least in the sense that he could not explain it away. And that, coming from him, meant everything. The audience erupted again, louder than before. The contestant smiled, not triumphantly, but with gratitude. The other judges praised the originality, the restraint, the authenticity. But it was Simon's reaction that mattered most. His disbelief had turned into respect. As the contestant left the stage, the energy in the theater lingered. People continued talking, replaying the moment, arguing about how it was done, or whether it truly was what it seemed. Simon sat quietly for a moment longer, lost in thought. He hated not having answers, but he also knew that moments like this were rare. This was why the show still mattered to him. This was why he still sat at that table after all these years. Backstage, the contestant took a deep breath, the weight of the moment finally settling in. Months, maybe years of preparation had led to those few minutes. Not to trick, not to deceive, but to create something genuine, something that could not be easily dismissed. Hearing Simon's admission felt surreal, like crossing an invisible line into a new reality. In the days that followed, clips of the performance spread everywhere. People replayed Simon's reaction more than anything else. The moment his skepticism cracked, the instant his confidence gave way to awe. Comment sections filled with debates, theories, and praise. Some insisted there had to be an explanation, others believed they had witnessed something extraordinary. Simon himself watched the clip later, alone. He paused it at the exact moment his expression changed. He studied his own face, searching for what he had felt then. He knew one thing for certain. The feeling could not be faked. That shock, that brief loss of certainty, was real. On the next episode, when the act was mentioned again, Simon smiled slightly. Not his usual sarcastic smile, but something more genuine. He acknowledged that being surprised was not a weakness. It was a reminder that even experts could still be learners. For the contestant, life changed overnight. Invitations poured in, Interviews, opportunities, questions that often had no simple answers. But through it all, they remained grounded, repeating the same idea. The goal was never to fool, but to remind people that the world still held mysteries. The performance became one of those legendary moments people referenced years later. When fans talked about times Simon Cowell had been truly stunned, this was always near the top of the list. Not because of explosions or theatrics, but because of its quiet power. In the end, what made the moment unforgettable was not just what happened on stage, but what happened inside Simon Cowell. For a brief instant, the man known for crushing dreams and exposing illusions was the one left without an explanation. And in that silence, surrounded by cheers and disbelief, the truth became clear. What he thought was fake had revealed itself as something undeniably real.